The message from the alien empire arrived with an air of finality. No pleasantries. No diplomacy. Just a terse, cold statement that Earth would receive a token gift, a warship. The transmission ended abruptly, as if the aliens were done with humanity before the conversation even started. It was their way of showing how little they thought of us. The ship appeared a few days later, hanging in Earth's orbit, its bulk dwarfing everything in sight. A massive, rusted hulk of metal. It seemed to flicker in and out of reality, as though its very presence was a mistake. The aliens had delivered it in the dead of night, under the cover of their incomprehensible technology. It didn't make any sense. Their empire stretched across galaxies, their fleets capable of destroying worlds without a second thought. And yet, they chose to give us this thing. Humanity watched as the wrecked vessel descended into the atmosphere, landing with a heavy thud on a desolate stretch of desert. We were confused, angry even, but beneath the surface, there was something else, something we couldn't quite place. Was it curiosity? Defiance? Or maybe we were just waiting for the inevitable. General Helena Cross stood at the base of the ship, staring up at the colossal hull. Her military training had prepared her for the best and the worst, but this felt like an insult. The vessel's surface was scarred, almost beyond recognition, and as it cooled, the faint smell of ionized metal and burnt wiring wafted through the air. "What is it?" Cross muttered, her voice low, as if speaking too loudly might make it real. "That," said Lieutenant Ethan Wright, pulling up a display pad, "is our problem now. They call it the Inferius One, a relic from an old conflict between their empire and a long-forgotten race." "Is it even functional?" Cross asked, the words leaving her mouth like a challenge to the absurdity of it all. "We'll find out," Wright replied, swiping through schematics on the pad. His face didn't betray any emotions. He was too calm for that. But his eyes narrowed as he processed the data. Barely any power left. The engines are fried, weapon systems are non-existent, and there's enough salvageable tech on this thing to barely make it worth repairing. "They think we're weak," Cross said, her tone bitter. "They think we'll never make it work." Wright didn't respond immediately. He just looked up at the ship, then back down at the display pad. It was impossible to miss the hidden smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe," he said, his voice soft, almost to himself. "Maybe they're right, but maybe they're also wrong." The assembly crew arrived within hours, led by Dr. Julian Rios, a man whose mind could decipher things beyond even his own understanding. His reputation had preceded him, and if there was anyone who could repair the impossible, it was him. At least, that's what he liked to tell himself. "What do we know?" Dr. Rios asked, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the challenge. "No ship of this class has ever been found in one piece. Most of it's been salvaged by alien scavengers." "Doesn't matter," said Cross. "We're going to fix it." Rios raised an eyebrow. "Fix it? This thing's barely held together with duct tape and prayers." "We'll see," Cross said with a smile that bordered on dangerous. "The aliens think they've handed us a broken toy. Let's show them what humans can do with it." As the hours ticked by, the repairs began. The crew worked with a sense of urgency, but there was a distinct undercurrent of pride in their actions. This ship, this symbol of the aliens' condescension, would not remain a laughingstock. They would rebuild it, re-engineer it, turn it into something that would defy their expectations. By the time the first power surge lit up the ship's dimmed core, no one was laughing anymore. Not the crew, not the military brass overseeing the operation, and certainly not the aliens who had been monitoring from afar. The Inferius One was waking up, and it was showing signs of something far more dangerous than anyone anticipated. Something had changed. Humanity had just been handed the weakest ship in the universe, but they were about to make it the deadliest. The Inferius One hummed to life with an eerie, disjointed rhythm as the first sparks of energy coursed through its ancient circuits. A low vibration pulsed from the ship's heart, unsettling the ground beneath it. No one had expected the ship to wake up at all, let alone react like this. Power systems that should have been long dead surged with life, lights flickering faintly on its rusted hull, and a series of distorted readings poured in from the control panels. The aliens, watching from their distant outposts, had no idea that this was only the beginning. The humans, on the other hand, were beginning to understand something about the Infraris, one that no one else had anticipated. It was more than just a relic. It was a puzzle, one that no one had managed to solve until now. "Dr. Rios, what's going on?" Cross asked as she looked over the shifting data on the terminal. The ship's power was still minimal, but the way it responded to their repairs was different. It wasn't behaving like any ship they had ever encountered. It was as if the Infraris one was reacting to them, more specifically, to their thoughts and intentions. Rios looked up from the console, his eyes wide. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "It's as if the ship's core is syncing with us, like it's adapting to what we're doing." He wasn't wrong. The more the crew worked on the ship, the more the ship seemed to shape itself around their ideas, their innovations. The engines, which had been nothing more than a jumble of burnt-out parts, slowly started to align themselves with the design specifications the engineers were inputting. The hull, once a mass of rust and corrosion, began to shed its decay, as if it were being rejuvenated from within. But it wasn't just the physical repairs. The ship's systems were acting in ways that defied logic. Every time they fixed one issue, another oddity appeared. New components, seemingly out of nowhere, began to materialize, integrated perfectly into the ship's design. A series of alien symbols, pulsing with faint light, appeared on the walls, symbols no human had ever seen before. Yet, somehow, the team instinctively understood them, not in the way they understood English or any known language, but through a deeper, almost subconscious connection. "What the hell is going on with this ship?" Captain Laura Blake, the military liaison overseeing the project, demanded, her tone sharp. "Is this even safe? What if we're unlocking something we don't fully understand?" Rios didn't answer right away. He stood frozen, eyes glued to the terminal, his fingers hovering over the console. For a moment, it felt as though the entire world held its breath. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice low with disbelief. "It's not just alive. It's aware." Cross, who had been silently watching the unfolding chaos, felt a chill run through her. The implications were enormous. Could this ship, this derelict hunk of metal, actually be sentient? Could it, be communicating with them in some unknown way? The thought was almost too much to bear, but it also made sense. The ship didn't just respond to their actions. It anticipated them. Every repair they made, every calculation they entered, was somehow mirrored back by the ship. It was as if it knew what they needed before they even asked for it. As days turned into weeks, the crew grew more comfortable with the ship, but it became increasingly clear that this was no ordinary vessel. The technology they were interfacing with wasn't just beyond their comprehension. It was rewriting their understanding of physics and reality. The ship's engines had begun to hum in an unnatural harmony, each pulse sending shockwaves through space-time. It wasn't just repairing itself, it was warping reality in ways no one could explain. The first major breakthrough came when one of the engineers, Lieutenant Markson, inadvertently triggered a core shift in the ship's primary reactor. The power surge was immense, but instead of destroying the ship, it unlocked an entirely new dimension of capability. "Rios, what did you do?" Cross snapped, rushing toward the console as the ship's readings went wild. Energy fields began to bend, twisting around the ship like a kaleidoscope of light. The walls flickered and vanished, only to reappear in different configurations, rearranging themselves without any discernible logic. "I didn't do anything," Rios shouted, his voice tinged with panic. "It just happened. The ship, did it." It was at that moment the crew realized the ship wasn't just a passive object. It was something far more dangerous, something capable of shifting the very fabric of reality itself. The Infraris one wasn't just being rebuilt. It was evolving, and humanity was caught in the middle of it. The question now wasn't how to fix it. The real question was, how far would they push the boundaries of what was possible? And would they survive what came next? The ship's transformation was happening too quickly to fully comprehend. What had once been a lifeless, rusted vessel was now pulsing with a strange energy, a force that seemed to bend the very laws of physics. With each passing day, the Infris one grew more unpredictable. Its once dead systems were now a living, breathing entity, an enigma that the human crew couldn't yet control but had no choice but to follow. Dr. Julian Rios, who had once been cautiously optimistic about the ship's potential, now found himself overwhelmed. Every time he thought he understood the ship's mechanics, it shifted again, revealing something new and incomprehensible. The engineers and scientists who worked alongside him shared the same confusion, but their fascination was undeniable. The alien technology, which had once seemed so foreign, was slowly becoming a part of their daily lives. They were starting to realize something that no one had considered before. The ship wasn't just a machine. It was an intelligence asterisk. "You're telling me," Captain Laura Blake said, her voice incredulous, "that the ship is thinking with us now? That it's reacting to our commands like it knows what we're going to do next?" Rios leaned over the glowing control panel, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted the dials. "That's exactly what's happening. The ship is adapting, anticipating. It's like a neural network, but on a scale we can't even measure. Every time we interact with it, it learns, becomes more attuned to us. And it's getting stronger, more advanced." The reality-bending capabilities of the Infris one had already begun to reveal themselves in small ways. Time seemed to warp in unpredictable bursts. On several occasions, crew members found themselves moving through corridors only to emerge in different parts of the ship, as if space itself had shifted. At first, they thought it was a malfunction, but after a few instances, they realized the ship's reality-altering properties were intentional. The laws of time and space were being rewritten, and they were at the mercy of a force they couldn't control. But these changes weren't limited to strange occurrences in space. The ship's core systems had begun to affect the environment around it. As the Infris one powered up, gravitational anomalies started appearing, distorting the local atmosphere. Communication systems scrambled, sending signals across unknown frequencies. Small objects within the ship would levitate or glitch in and out of existence. Even more disturbing, the crew began to feel the subtle shift in their own perceptions. Thoughts came more quickly, but they were fragmented ideas and impulses bleeding together in ways they couldn't fully grasp. Captain Blake watched the anomalies unfold with a growing sense of unease. "Rios, how close are we to triggering something catastrophic? This ship is making no sense. It's too much. We don't know what we're dealing with here." Rios didn't meet her gaze. His eyes were locked on the readings flickering across the screen, each number a confirmation that the ship was far beyond anything they could control. "I don't know, but we can't stop now. It's already changing the way we think. We can't undo it. It's already too far." The atmosphere on the ship had shifted as well. What began as a sense of awe and excitement had quickly turned into something darker. Every crew member felt the tension mounting. They weren't just dealing with alien technology anymore. They were up against something far more dangerous, a reality that was no longer bound by rules. They could no longer trust their senses, let alone their understanding of the universe. And then, during a routine systems check, the ship did something that neither Rios nor Blake could have predicted. The central control hub, which had been flickering erratically for days, suddenly stabilized. All readings ceased to fluctuate. The ship, for a brief moment, was perfectly still. But then, the gravity shifted. It was subtle at first, a lightening of the air, a shift in the weight of their bodies. Then it hit full force. Gravity collapsed inward like a collapsing star, pulling everything toward the center of the ship. Panels buckled. The floor beneath their feet rippled and buckled, as if the ship itself was warping. The crew screamed as they struggled to maintain their balance, but no matter how hard they fought, they were drawn to the center. Just as quickly as it had begun, the gravity returned to normal. The room was silent, the walls slightly bowed out from the pressure. Rios was panting, his face drained of color. He could barely comprehend what had just happened. That, Blake said, her voice barely a whisper, wasn't a malfunction. It was a test. A message. Rios nodded grimly, his eyes reflecting the uncertainty that had settled deep in his chest. The ship is trying to communicate. It's showing us what it can do. The message was clear now. The Infris One wasn't simply a ship. It was a weapon. One that could bend and warp reality itself. And whether humanity was ready or not, they had just unlocked something far more powerful than they ever could have imagined. The crew of the Infris One had no illusions anymore. The ship was no longer just a derelict artifact of an ancient war. It was a force, an unpredictable, dangerous force capable of altering reality itself. And while their progress had been impressive, each day brought with it new complications and increasing risks. The anomalies were becoming harder to ignore. At first, it had been small, subtle shifts, gravity fluctuations, time distortions, objects appearing and disappearing without explanation. But now, the phenomena were escalating, growing more powerful and more erratic. The ship no longer just reacted to the crew's intentions. It anticipated them. Every action, every thought, seemed to trigger a cascade of events, each more spectacular and terrifying than the last. Dr. Julian Rios had spent the past several days trying to understand the ship's core systems. The ship's artificial intelligence, if it could even be called that, was unlike anything they had encountered before. It wasn't just a machine, nor was it a fully conscious entity. It was something in between, a force that could manipulate the laws of physics and bend reality to its will. It was both an enigma and a weapon, and it was clear now that the aliens had not fully understood its potential. Or perhaps they had chosen to ignore it. "Rios, we need answers," Captain Lara Blake said, her voice steady but tense. "The higher-ups are starting to get nervous. They want results." Rios met her gaze, his eyes sunken and weary. The constant pressure was starting to take its toll. "I know," he muttered. "But the more I dig into this ship, the less I understand. It's not like anything we've seen before. It's as though it's drawing on something beyond our comprehension. It's alive in ways we can't explain." Blake clenched her fists, frustration boiling beneath the surface. "Alive? What do you mean by that? We can't afford to treat this like some kind of mystery novel. We need a solution. And fast." Before Rios could respond, the ship suddenly lurched. It wasn't a mechanical jolt or a power surge. It was as though the very fabric of space-time had been twisted. Crew members stumbled, clutching the walls as the ship's hull vibrated, then grew eerily still. The air felt thick with a tension that none of them could explain. "What the hell was that?" Blake demanded, regaining her footing. Rios was cut off as the ship's internal systems activated on their own, the lights flickering wildly. The control panels began to pulse with strange symbols, alien markings that seemed to shift with every second, evading their understanding. This wasn't me. The ship, it's changing itself." Then, without warning, the ship's main engines roared to life. It wasn't gradual. It was an explosion of power surging through the entire vessel. The Infris One was no longer just an inert machine. It had become a living weapon. The ship's core was humming with an otherworldly energy, and its gravitational field fluctuated wildly. The walls of the ship seemed to warp, bending inward, as though the very space around them had become elastic. "We need to shut it down," Blake barked, her voice tight with panic. Shut it down now, but it was too late. The ship's systems had already moved beyond their control. The hum of the engines turned into a low, deafening roar as the ship's exterior shimmered. With a sudden flash, the ship warped out of reality, vanishing from its position in space and appearing several hundred miles away, as if it had folded space itself. The crew barely had time to react. their bodies pressed against the walls by the force of the sudden acceleration. "What the hell did we just do?" Lieutenant Ethan Wright gasped, his face pale as he gripped a console. "This isn't possible," Rios murmured, staring at the readings. "We've just folded spacetime. We've bent reality." Blake's mind raced, the implications of what had just happened settling in. The Inferius One wasn't just capable of warping space. It was mastering it. Every time they thought they understood what the ship was doing, it shifted again, revealing an even greater power. The ship's systems were now synchronized in a way that made the laws of physics irrelevant. The boundaries of space, time, and energy were no longer fixed, they were fluid. The Inferius One had evolved beyond their comprehension, and it was clear now that it had only one purpose: destruction. "We can't let it get any worse," Blake said, her voice low, almost to herself. "We need to contain it before it spirals out of control." But just as the words left her mouth, the ship shook again. This time, the shaking wasn't random. It was deliberate, a resonance that seemed to echo through the entire structure. And then, in a single instant, the ship's external hull dissolved into an iridescent, liquid-like substance, revealing what lay beneath: an enormous, shimmering portal, a tear in reality itself. The Inferius One wasn't just a ship. It was a weapon of unimaginable power, capable of opening rifts between dimensions. And as the crew stared in horror at the swirling vortex, they realized the true scale of what they were dealing with. This ship could tear apart entire worlds if it was pushed too far. And the worst part? They had no idea how to stop it. The ship was no longer just a tool. It was an unstoppable force, and humanity had just unleashed it. The tension aboard the Inferius One was palpable. The ship had evolved beyond anything the crew had anticipated, and now they were faced with the consequences of their actions. The portal, still swirling at the center of the ship, pulsed with a violent energy, its edges crackling with unstable power. It was a tear in the very fabric of reality, one that the ship itself had created. "What the hell are we supposed to do now?" Captain Laura Blake asked, her voice strained, the weight of their situation finally settling on her shoulders. "We've unleashed something that could rip apart the universe, and it's only a matter of time before it gets worse." Dr. Julian Rios stood at the central console, his eyes glued to the readings. His face was drawn, pale from exhaustion. Every attempt to analyze the portal had failed. The ship's internal systems were no longer responding to their commands, and the reality-bending technology had reached a point where it seemed to operate autonomously. They had no control. "We need to close the portal," Rios said, his voice low and steady despite the chaos unfolding around him. "But I don't know how. This ship, it's not just breaking the laws of physics anymore. It's rewriting them. We can't just flip a switch and undo it." Blake paced back and forth, her mind racing. The implications of their situation were enormous. The aliens had given them the ship, sure, but they hadn't prepared them for this. None of the military strategists, none of the scientists, had ever considered the possibility that the ship could do something like this. They were facing an entity far beyond anything they could comprehend. "Shut it down," Blake ordered, her voice hard. "We don't have a choice. If we can't control it, we need to neutralize it." "I agree," Lieutenant Ethan Wright said from across the room. He had been quiet for most of the operation, but now he stood with purpose, his eyes sharp. "But shutting it down might be impossible. We might end up triggering a chain reaction we can't stop." "Then we have to take that risk," Blake replied, her eyes dark with determination. "We either control this ship or we destroy it. There's no other option." The crew moved into action, preparing the ship for a final, desperate attempt to stabilize the situation. They gathered in the control room, each person acutely aware of the consequences. As the ship hummed around them, the portal continued to grow, its edges stretching, pulling at the seams of reality. It was only a matter of time before it breached the boundary of the ship entirely. Rios worked feverishly at the console, pulling up data streams that made no sense, but he had no choice but to follow them. I think I found something, he said suddenly, his voice a mixture of hope and fear. There's a fail-safe mechanism buried deep within the core. It's designed to shut down the ship's systems in case of a catastrophic failure. Blake's heart raced. Where? What do we need to do? Rios hesitated. It's not straightforward. The fail-safe is integrated into the ship's reality-altering system. We'll have to disrupt the ship's core power flow, which means engaging the very thing that's keeping the portal open. Blake took a step forward. We can't afford to waste time. Whatever it takes, we do it now. Rios nodded grimly. If we do this wrong, it could tear apart the entire ship. The ship could go critical. The tension among the crew was thick. They were about to make a move that could either save them or destroy everything they had worked for. But they had no other choice. Blake gave the order, and the crew began the delicate process of triggering the failsafe. Rios guided them through each step, his hands moving swiftly across the console, inputting commands that felt like an endless series of impossible calculations. Every second felt like an eternity. The ship groaned beneath them, its power surging as it resisted their efforts to pull it back from the brink. Then, as they reached the final command, something unexpected happened. The ship's interior trembled violently, the walls vibrating with an unnatural force. The portal pulsed again, expanding outward. But this time, instead of shrinking, the energy shifted, converging inward toward the core of the ship. The ship itself seemed to be resisting the shutdown, as if it were aware of what they were trying to do. "No, no, no!" Rios shouted, his fingers flying across the console in a frantic attempt to regain control. "It's not supposed to." A blinding flash filled the control room, and the world around them seemed to collapse. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no light, just an endless, oppressive stillness. Then, slowly, everything began to return. Blake's vision cleared, and she saw that the portal was gone. The ship's systems had gone dark, but the air felt heavy, charged with a new kind of energy. The Infra's one had stopped its violent thrashing, its internal hum quieted. "Did we do it?" Blake asked, her voice hoarse with disbelief. Rios looked at the console, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he nodded. We did. The failsafe worked. The portal is closed. The ship's systems are offline, but we've stabilized the core. We've stopped it." Blake exhaled, a wave of relief washing over her. They had survived. But as she looked around the quiet, darkened ship, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. They had just awakened a force that could change the course of history. And though they had sealed it away, for now, there was no telling what the future would bring. The silence aboard the Infra's one was unnerving. It wasn't just the absence of the usual hum of the ship's engines, or the distant sounds of activity from the crew. It was the oppressive stillness that had taken over the vessel after the failed attempt to contain its power. The crew, though relieved to have closed the portal and stabilized the core, knew one thing with unsettling clarity. They had only scratched the surface of the ship's potential. Captain Laura Blake stood at the command deck, her eyes fixed on the view screen. The stars outside seemed to shimmer, but they were no longer the comforting dots in the vast expanse of space they had once been. Now they felt distant, cold, alien. The Infra's one was no longer just a ship. It was a harbinger of change. Humanity had been thrust into a new reality, one where they wielded a power that could unravel the universe itself. "Captain," Lieutenant Ethan Wright's voice interrupted her thoughts, his tone cautious. "The portal is closed, but the ship is still active. I don't think we've fully deactivated it. We might have just contained it, for now." Blake turned slowly to face him, her expression unreadable. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. She had ordered the shutdown of the ship, but something deep inside her told her that the Infra's one wasn't done with them. It wasn't finished. "We contained it," she said firmly, her voice steady. "But we can't ignore the fact that we've only begun to understand what we're dealing with. We've unlocked something here, something the aliens never fully grasped. And if we don't control it, it will control us." Rios, standing across the room, cleared his throat. The reality-bending technology, it's still alive in the systems. We've disabled the portal, but I think it's clear now that the ship is a living organism. Its core is an intelligent system in itself, not something we can just shut off. Blake's gaze sharpened. Meaning? We'll have to study it. We can't just lock it down and hope for the best. Rios replied, his voice grim. It's alive, Lara. It's not a ship, not really. It's a weapon. It's a key to something much bigger than us. The crew shifted uneasily, the realization sinking in. For all the power they had contained, the Inferius One was far from defeated. It was merely dormant, and its knowledge, its technology, could change everything. We're no longer just repairing a ship, Blake said, her voice low but resolute. We're handling something far more dangerous. And we're not the only ones aware of it. The aliens know what we've done. They've seen what this ship is capable of. Rios nodded, his gaze distant as he considered the implications. We don't know what the aliens will do, but they'll come for this ship. We've already seen their arrogance. And now they'll know what humanity is capable of, if they haven't already. Blake exhaled slowly, her mind racing with the enormity of the situation. They had a weapon, one that could manipulate space, time, and the very fabric of reality. They had seen its power firsthand. They had closed the portal, but they knew it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The Inferius One was now humanity's greatest asset, and its greatest threat. We've reached a turning point, Blake said, her voice cutting through the tension. Humanity is no longer just a speck in the universe. With this ship, we've become a force to be reckoned with. But we have to learn to control it before someone else does. Wright glanced toward the view screen. And if the aliens don't give us a choice, we'll be ready, Blake said, her voice sharp with determination. We've been underestimated for far too long. But now we've got something they'll never expect. We've got a ship that bends reality. And we'll use it to defend our future. The crew fell silent, each person digesting the weight of her words. For the first time since the Inferius One had landed on Earth, they realized the true scope of their situation. They weren't just at war with an alien empire. They were at war with the unknown, an unknowable power that could reshape the galaxy in ways they couldn't predict. As Blake looked out at the stars again, a quiet determination took root in her chest. There was no going back now. The Inferius One was a symbol of humanity's potential, but also a reminder of its fragility. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity had just entered a new era, and how they chose to wield this power would determine whether they would rise as the galaxy's dominant force or fall into obscurity. She turned back to the crew, meeting their eyes with unyielding resolve. Prepare the ship. We're going to learn everything we can about what we've unlocked. And when the aliens come, we'll be ready. This is our time now. And so, the Inferius One would become the stage for a new kind of war, a war not just for survival, but for the future of humanity itself. The galaxy would soon learn what humanity was truly capable of. And the consequences of underestimating them would be far more severe than anyone could have imagined.